think we were commenting with some of you before that Oxford is not the best place where to communicate with other departments. It's a great place where to do research, but not exactly the most communicative place where you know exactly who is doing what, where, and sometimes there's a lot of overlapping. So one of the tasks of this project, which is basically a pilot project for a year with ethics of biomedical big data, is also making sure that if anyone is doing any work on this topic that is around here, well, we will be able to get in touch with them, they will be able to know what we're doing and perhaps join forces. So if you find that some of the things I'm going to illustrate in the next 15 minutes or so are well known, just remember that that is part of the plan, to map territory that we do share. So this is something that we all know, and I will be very quick. There are 1,000 different ways of talking about big data, especially biomedical big data. The 3V has been with us for some time, and that's what we can all keep in mind in terms of velocity, variety, and volume of the data in question. It's not something that we need to concentrate on. Something else that I will assume for the rest of the day as being part of background knowledge that everybody shares is the amount of data that we are accumulating. Again, you can pick up different graphics, different illustrations, and even if something like this is wrong by a large margin, it's still staggering. This is 2009, for those of you too far away, 0.8 zettabytes, and this is the projection for 2020, 35 zettabytes, which really means that basically all the data we have been generated in a matter of maybe a decade, more or less. You can sort of assume, we can all assume that anything that is available in terms of digital data is very, very young. There are issues about this, but one thing that we need to remember is that the only constraints in the growth of this massive amount of data are physics, human intelligence, and memory, as in platform, how much space there is, where to dump all this stuff. And neither of the three seem to be slowing down. Well, platform, maybe human intelligence, which remains a constant. But no, physics and memory are doing their best to make sure that this growth will keep moving ahead. Now, since 2012, remember that that definition was given about 15 years ago with the 3Vs. But in 2012, the World Economic Forum realized that this big data is of enormous value. Of course, they had in mind not exactly health, but more business. But they really compare that to currency, gold, something that is an economic asset. And as such, it is a resource that, and I'm coming slowly towards the point of health data, is a resource because we can use it for a number of reasons, which I will illustrate in the next slide, given their particular nature. Now, the non-rival nature of data is trivial. It's worth remembering that last time we had a fundamental resource that determined the life of a society, namely oil, we started fighting because that was rival. So the fact that this is non-rival, it helps enormously in terms of how much we're going to get together. Of course, it's rising, as I showed you before, in terms of growth. Oh, by the way, I try to use R's all over the place, just in case. It is refinable, as we all know. It's also renewable, which is suspiciously cheap. More on this in a moment. Nothing that is a precious resource should be so easily renewable as data. Somewhere, somehow, there is a cost, and we better be aware of that. And is repurposable, and that's the whole point. And this is where most of the discussion later on in this presentation about consent starts getting into trouble. The repurposable nature of the data generate headaches in terms of how do I go about acquiring consent for the particular use of those data in medical context. Because it's such a flexible resource, it's also very useful. You can use it to improve, tailor, predict, simulate, decide, and innovate all over the place. And especially for people in Brussels, this starts getting really exciting. I think the Home Office is also a little bit interested in that. Innovation. And that means money, that means growth, that means jobs. Wonderful. Now, this is also true, of course, in the health industry, as we know. Now, given all that, a bit of data in terms of how realistic all this is, Well, big data contributed about 25 billion pounds to the UK economy in 2011. So it does make a big difference in terms of how much it moves things around. The forecast for 2017 is 40 billion. Now, this is a report by the Centre for Economics and Business Research. They might have an interest in showing that that is how much big data is contributing to the economy. Once again, assume that they are hugely off target by 20%, let's say, but they're still static. It's not surprising that we're having this discussion here with those data and the successful exploitation of big data in UK, because according to Open Data Barometer, which is an independent agency for assessment of how governments are using big data in their own internal sort of applications, the UK is number one. I think it's immediately followed by the darker these areas around the world, Scandinavian countries, US. As you cannot see, these are the different areas where the British government is being successful up to 100% all the way around in applying big data for particular purposes. Citizens and society, entrepreneurs, data sets for accountability, social policy, innovation. The one that is lacking here, and you can see at least the shape of the graph, is impact on the social side. That's where even the top of the class in all governments still needs to make steps forward, which brings us again to the topic of our meeting. There is plenty of room for improvement here. As we will hear today, big data are a socially valuable resource, and I will say more about this because I expect more will be said, at least in that direction, later on. In terms of health, and I'm coming close to the topic, and I also need to keep an eye on the time, having said what I said about people running out of time. This is a particular interesting, valuable example of how big data is being used in health. It's a European example. The IME, or IME, or different ways of pronouncing this, the Innovative Medicines Initiatives, is the world's biggest public-private partnership in life sciences. Just been renewed for 3.3 billion euros, 2014-24. So it's a huge investment, truly immense in terms of effort. And part of that is EMIF, the European Medical Information Framework, which has been funded for 5 years for 56 million euros, which is trying to, as they know, or I should say by now, we present on the website, create an environment that allows for efficient reuse of existing health data. Basically, it's the idea that there's so much data wealth in Europe that is not being exploited properly, that something needs to be done at a sort of meta level to make sure that the hospital, the research group, the university, the institution, the big pharma talk to each other and exploit those data properly. Now that, of course, is at the same time, technical, ethical, medical effort that requires a lot of expertise put together. There are 3 lines of research here, the platform for the EMIF, but also 2 particular sort of pilot applications, as you well know, 2 benchmarking moments. One, what happens with the Alzheimer's disease, and the other one, what happens with metabolic issues, issues concerning complications when you eat too much, obesity. Now, this is a clear example of what I meant in terms of social value and health value of big data. Back to the issue, as I said, this is not coming for free. I mean, there are a lot of costs in terms of acquisition and storage, curation and usability, security and safety, accessibility, analytics, of course, law and ethics, and that's why we're meeting today on these topics. And at the end of the day, all this comes with a dollar attached to it, or a euro, or a pound. So anything that you need to solve from top to down will require some kind of financial effort. Now, more in terms of straight to the issues that I personally would like to explore within this project. One is the impression I have that big data, in terms of epistemology of big data, is a matter of identifying small patterns. And because the patterns are small, as I will illustrate in a moment, then huge efforts have to be made, and the sort of big digging that needs to be done to get those small patterns in a significant way means that you break a lot of bases around you. I mean, there's a lot of impact. So one is small sensitive patterns and how we deal with them. The other one is an issue that is becoming more sensitive as we speak, namely privacy applied not just to individuals but also to groups. Then, of course, the point that I already made about repurposing, including social data, data that comes from social media, and how we can deal with that in terms of consent. And finally, consent and philanthropy, what it means for people to start developing a culture where basically you donate your data for research, in the same way in which you may donate your organs, for example. Now, quickly on all this, because we don't have much time, I've already said something about the discovery of small patterns, big data. They require increasingly powerful tools, and therefore they can be invasive. I look at this a bit like fracking, mind the spelling. It is a problem of understanding what impact you're going to have in order to extract the resource, because it's a kind of violent way of getting those small patterns. Because they are sensitive, those small patterns that we identify, well, they are old data-related problems. Privacy, ownership, usability, these are stuff that has been with us for a long time. I mean, I remember it, 10, 15, 20 years ago was already an issue. But also newish or renewed big related challenges. And that's where I want to move to the group idea. When we deal with an individual that is informationally inexhaustible, now you pick up Mary, or Alice in this case, and there is no amount of description that can exhaust that resource as a source of information out there. Because of that, and because it's something that basically you can expand ad infinitum, just if you need a more mathematically oriented analogy, it's just the number of real numbers between 0 and 1. You can have as many as you like. Because the data points about Alice, therefore, it's boundless. Something that we do in order to deal with Alice is got to do with abstracting, generalizing, aggregating, interpolating, grouping together, classifying. And at the end of the day, Alice becomes a young woman with a college degree or some educational needs, overqualified, with a driving license. No, it becomes a type. And that's how you can deal with Alice. Otherwise, Alice, you just have to meet her and have a conversation with her. Which means that in order to tailor interactions to Alice the patient now, you have to profile Alice. It's very hard to deal with Alice without making sure that Alice belongs to a particular category. And this is a bit of a tension here between how much you care about the individual and how much you want to make sure that the individual is categorized properly under the right type as a token of that particular type. So the risk in this case, it becomes what in other contexts I personally deal with in terms of a proxy culture, which is the culture in which we are increasingly immersed. You don't go to a restaurant before having checked TripAdvisor or which is a hotel, or you don't buy a book unless you check the reviews on Amazon, etc. So basically there's always a filter, and increasingly more filters, proxies, for quality, for information. And in a proxy culture, the profile, Alice, the real person, becomes the profile, and the profile becomes predictable, which is exactly what we want to have in terms of health treatment. But the predictable runs the risk of becoming exploitable, and that is the boundary between the good bits and the bad bits. So that's one area where I hope to do more work personally in terms of handling sensitive patterns. Repurposing, mentioned this in social data. Because we all know this, I will be quick on this as well. There's an upstream problem in terms of repurposing of data and consent, and a downstream problem. People not to be treated only as means, resources, types, targets. like a student, a customer, a consumer, a citizen, a potential terrorist, an Alzheimer patient, and so on. In this case, we have plenty of sources of data from biobanks all the way to Apple Health Kit. This is just a list. I know you know, so I won't have to highlight this too much. A couple of examples of what's happening on the social media so that we understand what repurposing means. This is what has happened with Nike. In 2006, they launched a Nike iPod, and they were really into producing gadgets. By 2014, they've given up completely. They don't care about the Nike fuel bands, which will be discontinued. But what they care is the 20 million users on Nike Plus, the database which they have. Those are 28 million people that are English speaking, sufficiently wealthy, they have time in their hands, etc. And they need to be taken care of. So what Nike said that they want to be the Apple for music when it comes to sports-related health data. You can see where the shift is moving. To the extent that these days you can have a comparison of best diabetes iPhone and Android apps of the year. When I discovered that, I was astounded. I thought it was like something that's growing these days. No, it's old. It's been around already for a while. That's 2014. And the reason is that in the diabetes case, a specific case, 2012 is when we had 1.5 million deaths for diabetes. 2014, sorry about the graphics, which has been screwed up by the screen. The estimate is that 9% of the adult population will be suffering. The World Health Organization projections will be suffering from diabetes. And in 2030, diabetes will be the 7th leading cause of death. Now that is an immense market, just to put it bluntly, and that's why Apple is interested. This means that you have millions of people ready to buy your gadgets and being enrolled in a database. Comes the iWatch. I was very skeptical when they launched it until I read something very recently in the Financial Times. April 13, which is just around the corner, IBM's signs with Apple, Medtronic, and Johnson & Johnson a digital health deal. And the deal is about basically taking care of the data that the iWatch will be collecting and making Apple's Health Kit and IBM Cloud Storage Cloud work together, and possibly for research, having Apple's Research Kit for medical purposes. Now, that is where we go in with big data, socially oriented, collected from people in a way that can help also research. As Michael Rodin, Senior Vice President of IBM Watson, said, according to him, the generation who buy, that's the English we use these days, Apple Watches are interested in data philanthropy. Well, maybe, or maybe not. But that's a very nice way of bypassing any ethical problem. Or they're just donating their data, so what's the issue? Well, maybe they're not donating. Maybe there's more in it than just a bit of a friendly attitude. I've got more examples about this, but time is running out, so I won't bother you with this. The consent and philanthropy leads me to the last point. You probably recognize the building here, and you all know about the problem that we're having in Brussels at the moment. The current draft of the General Data Protection Regulation, which will become active at some point, as today, as far as I know, as you know, contains derogations in terms of usage of data for historical, statistical, scientific research. And the mechanism is quite simple. Appalling, but simple. You draft a data protection document, and it's too strict. It means that you will never be able to do any medical research in Europe from that moment onwards. So someone complains and says, no, something has to be done. So you drill holes this big in the document, called historical, statistical, and scientific research. Almost anything goes through this. And therefore, you make the original document useless. And someone realized that overreaction in the usual swinging pendulum in Brussels has been too much. So they go back and says, well, we want to remove, once again, this particular derogations. And we're back to the original document, which doesn't make medical research possible. And in swinging up and down, the Wellcome Trust has intervened, saying, can you please stop and allow us to do research in Europe using big data for medical purposes, without requiring, basically, if we go back to the original document, consent for any reuse of the data when it comes to millions of people involved in with databases that contains, of course, billions of data points. And that is, as far as I know, the state of play as we speak. These are all the people and associations and organizations that have signed that petition, where basically what Contrast has begged the European Union not to go back to basically the original document, which will mean that medical research and big data will have to be exported. Conclusion, one thing that I hope to get out of this project is to understand how we put these two moral duties together. Safeguarding individual group rights in terms of what happens when you have all this big data out there that can impinge on their lives or the life of groups. But meanwhile, keeping in mind that what we're doing is to improve human life for future generations. So it's not just about the individual today, but it's also about what's going to happen to the next generation once the big data in biomedical context is exploited properly. So protection of personal records, but also improvement of health and living standards for the future. Unregulated big data is a slippery slope, so we shouldn't go down the road inadvertently, but we need some philosophical ambitions, and that's why we're having this workshop. In other words, I think the best way to move forward is to move forward quickly but cautiously, or as Aldous Manusio said during a previous revolution, the printing revolution, pestina lente, move fast but slowly. And I hope that's what we're going to do with this workshop. And at 10 o'clock, thank you so much. I managed my time.